Ambassador Kethara of the Stellar Concordat stood in the ruins of what had once been the galaxy's most powerful governing chamber, watching human mediator Sarah Kim walk between the broken fragments of a 1,000-year-old diplomatic tradition. The irony was not lost on her that the same species they had banished from civilized space 3 centuries ago was now the only thing standing between galactic civilization and complete collapse. The Veiltaran Trade Consortium refuses to acknowledge the Zephyrian Collective's territorial claims, Sarah reported, her voice carrying the calm authority that had somehow managed to broker 17 different ceasefires in the past month. Both sides are demanding immediate military intervention to enforce what they consider legitimate governance. Kethara's gill slits fluttered with frustrated exhaustion. The Stellar Concordat had once been the unquestioned authority in galactic affairs, their rigid system of laws and protocols maintaining order across 47 systems for over a millennium. But 3 centuries of increasing complexity had created a legal framework so Byzantine that no single species could comprehend it anymore. Every dispute now generated counter-disputes. Every law created new loopholes. Every decision spawned appeals that lasted decades. "And your recommendation?" Kethara asked, though she already knew that whatever Sarah proposed would somehow work, despite violating every principle of established diplomatic procedure. Sarah smiled with that peculiar human expression that the Concordat had once found so unsettling. "I'm going to have them build something together." The suggestion was so absurd that Kethara's translator circuits briefly malfunctioned. "Ambassador Kim, with respect, these are sovereign galactic powers engaged in a territorial dispute involving 17 star systems and resource rights worth trillions of credits. They are not children in need of a collaborative art project." "Aren't they?" Sarah asked gently. 3 days later, Kethara found herself aboard a mining platform in disputed space, watching something that should have been impossible. The Veiltaran and Zephyrian fleets, which had been minutes away from the largest space battle in galactic history, were working together to construct what Sarah called a friendship station. The project made no logical sense. The station served no strategic purpose, controlled no resources, and established no territorial claims. It was simply a structure that both sides were building together, using techniques and technologies that required constant cooperation and communication to implement successfully. Yet somehow, in the process of arguing over fusion reactor configurations and discussing optimal asteroid mineral extraction, the 2 species had begun solving their actual territorial disputes as side conversations. "How did you know this would work?" Kethara asked as they watched Veiltaran engineers and Zephyrian technicians share lunch in the station's half-completed commons area. "I didn't," Sarah admitted, "but I knew that fighting over something is different from building something. When you're fighting, you're focused on what the other person is doing wrong. When you're building, you're focused on how to make something better." This approach, which the human diplomatic corps called constructive mediation, had become the foundation of what was quietly being recognized as the most effective conflict resolution system the galaxy had ever seen. But it wasn't the methods that made humanity's return so revolutionary. It was the philosophy behind them. The old Concordat system had been based on the principle that order required enforcement, that peace was achieved by preventing conflict through increasingly complex rules and punishments. Humanity's approach was based on something that had initially seemed like dangerous naivety, the belief that most beings actually wanted to cooperate, and that conflict usually arose from misunderstanding rather than genuine malice. "The fundamental flaw in our legal framework," explained Dr. Marcus Webb, humanity's chief diplomatic theorist, to the assembled Concordat Council, was the assumption that law should be about restriction. "We've discovered that effective governance is actually about facilitation, creating structures that make cooperation easier than conflict." The evidence was undeniable. In 3 years since humanity's return from exile, galactic conflicts had decreased by 87%. Trade disputes that had traditionally taken decades to resolve were being settled in weeks. The massive bureaucratic apparatus that had once required billions of citizens just to maintain was being replaced by simple protocols that most species could understand and implement locally. But the most shocking transformation was in the nature of galactic civilization itself. "They've created something we never thought possible," Kethara reported to the Concordat High Council. "A legal system that makes itself obsolete. As species learn to use their protocols, they need less and less external mediation. They're not building an empire or expanding their authority. They're teaching everyone else to govern themselves." The exile had been crucial to humanity's development. Banished for their chaotic unpredictability and their disturbing tendency to question established authority, humans had spent 3 centuries in the galactic rim developing what they called adaptive governance, legal and social systems that could evolve and improve rather than simply accumulate complexity. When the galaxy's old order finally collapsed under the weight of its own contradictions, humanity had returned not as conquerors but as gardeners, helping other species grow forms of cooperation that worked for their unique cultural and biological needs. The new galactic order wasn't ruled by humanity. It was shaped by human principles that had become so effective that other species adopted them voluntarily. The rigid hierarchies and enforcement mechanisms of the old Concordat were being replaced by networks of mutual aid and collaborative problem-solving. "You realize," Kethara said to Sarah, as they watched the completion ceremony for the Friendship Station, now serving as a model for similar projects across the galaxy, "that you've essentially made our entire governmental system irrelevant." Sarah nodded thoughtfully. That was the idea. Good government should work itself out of a job by teaching people to govern themselves. The best laws are the ones that become unnecessary because everyone understands why they existed in the first place. The galaxy had learned something profound. True authority doesn't come from the power to command, but from the wisdom to help others find their own way forward. Humanity hadn't returned as new emperors, they had returned as teachers, showing the galaxy that the highest form of law was the principle that made all other laws unnecessary, the simple recognition that everyone benefited when everyone could thrive.